This
really work well,
conference
though.
will now
So
be recorded.
we got some conference call background stuff going on. So especially welcome to the new members. Tom, it's great to see you again. It's been a while, but we go way back to the Washington area process. And I tell you, we've added a couple new good members. You know, and you guys actually, for the new members in particular, this is a very interesting and effective council. This is you guys make us do our job. The questions we get are always cutting edge, difficult, interesting questions. And we usually try to combine meetings with some action items. We have a couple today, but we're also today going to be providing sort of an overview and background piece, which we hope will definitely be valuable to the new members, but in going through it, I found it valuable to me, who's been doing this for 30 years. So hopefully that'll be worth everyone's while. So a couple quick updates. We are in the process of finalizing our 2022 Clean Air Progress Report. We do that every year during Clean Air Awareness Week in early May, and so it's near final. We will share it with the council. You'll see bits and pieces of it in one of the presentations today on air quality progress. We continue to make that progress. Fine particle levels continue to drop, which is, you know, fine particulate air pollution is probably one of the riskiest issues we deal with, but it's also probably one of our biggest success stories. We went from having some of the country's worst fine particles to now being well in attainment with the current standard. There's a new standard coming, but we may end up being in attainment with that new tougher standard when the time comes. So ozone continues to drop. We got the closest we have ever been last year to coming into attainment with ozone, because let's face it, 2021 was a strange year with all the COVID issues going on and people not driving as much. So we got so close. We had higher levels this year. We'll show you some of this data later. We're still very close. And the nature of our ozone problem has changed. We no longer see really big days where we have really high levels across a big chunk of the state. Now, when we have a violation of the standard, it's usually at one monitor or two monitors, just barely above the standard. But that keeps us in non-attainment. So we have our work cut out for us. I guess I'll try to be short, but there's been a lot going on recently, really good stuff. We are seeing a lot of action at the federal level, which is something I think some of us have been waiting for quite a long time. Most importantly, linked to our ozone problem is just over the last week, EPA took a very positive action on dealing with pollution that floats in from upwind states, ozone pollution that floats in from upwind states that we call ozone transport. EPA last week proposed perhaps the strongest interstate ozone transport rule they've ever proposed. And it really reflects a lot of the comments we've been submitting. We've talked to AQCAC about this all the time, but it is a vast improvement upon the way the federal government has handled helping states like Maryland with the pollution that might come from Pennsylvania or West Virginia. I think many of you know, we'll talk about this in a minute, but we continue to run our research program. And with a straight face, I can say that on our worst days, 70 to 90% of the ozone that ends up being measured in Maryland originates in a state upwind of Maryland. So this is a really positive thing. For those of you that follow climate change, there's also been a series of actions by the federal government over the past couple weeks on climate change. Some of the most important ones have been in the mobile source arena, because we are to a certain extent constrained by what we can do with mobile sources because of the way the Clean Air Act works. And so having a strong federal program pushing reductions of greenhouse gases in the mobile source sector is absolutely critical. So all in all, things are going relatively well, and we continue to appreciate the great work that AQCAC does. I can look back at the work you all have done over the past 30 years, and I can point to actions that were both really positive in terms of reducing air pollution, but literally cutting edge new programs that we've implemented in Maryland. The 2015 NOx regulation that you guys approved, good Lord, that's a long time ago now, but the new federal rule is actually starting to look like that rule that we all adopted in 2015. So again, this has been a great council. I enjoy it. Like I said, you make our job hard because you ask hard questions, but that's good for everybody. So John, I'll hand it back to you. That's probably a little longer than you wanted or I intended, but I really appreciate the work this council does. And for the new members, I think you'll find that an interesting council. A couple of the council members really make the MDE staff dance a little bit. So so again, let's move on to the meeting.
He's saying we need to keep him on his toes, but they do a great job at Maryland Department of the Environment, and we're proud to be partners with them. So these meetings are normally scheduled 4 times a year. That's what our routine has been for years, and then we can't cancel them when there's not an action or an item necessary. So we haven't met since June of last year, and what's next on the agenda is approval of those minutes. Everyone has seen the minutes, including the new members. That gives you an idea of the things we talked about at the last meeting. If we could quickly take 30 seconds to review them, and people stop me if I push this too fast, but you have them in your hands, you've seen them, you were at the meeting. Look at them and let us know if there's any changes you like, and then I'll look for a motion to approve it, and I'll be quiet for a half a minute.
I'll just say, Tad, that this is Ben Hobbs from Hopkins. I'll just say, Tad, that these are remarkably detailed and very helpful to have this sort of record. You almost didn't even need to be there. So I'm grateful to whomever put in this hard work. It's hard to review this in 30 seconds, but
Ben, I wouldn't do that to you, except that it was sent out ahead of time. I'm sorry. If you need more time, we'll give you whatever time you need.
It's actually very, very helpful to have that if you ever want to review what happened. So I'm stating appreciation.
If does anyone need more time? I'm not hearing any requests for more time, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved,
I
Larry
move to
Stone.
close the meeting.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Well, before I just one brief discussion, one
Okay.
brief bit of discussion. So we had a contentious issue last time, which was onboard diagnostics, and there were several of us who felt that it was necessary to have independent verification of manufacturer supplied onboard diagnostics, in part to avoid the kind of debacle that the whole nation had with the Volkswagen issue, but other possible. So it was a contentious vote. It was 8-4. I would appreciate having in the minutes who actually voted for and who voted against in a situation like that. When it's unanimous, I think it doesn't matter, but I would request that that be augmented with who voted for and who voted against.
Thanks for speaking up, Larry. Is that something we can put into these minutes and put the roll call in for that, Randy or Tad?
We certainly can, John. It's, and certainly there's something we'll just have to, when we get to the end of a vote, it does seem to be having a separation, as Larry mentioned, of approving and disapproving. We just may have to ask that each member read it off clearly again, as we're trying to capture it. It's a little easier in person, but we'll do our best. And we have to
Do your best. And Larry, would that meet your needs if they do their best?
Yeah, on the contentious votes, on a vote 8-4, I think it's really important to have.
Oh yeah, I think from going forward, we're going to make sure we have it right based on your recommendation. I think it's a good recommendation. A non-unanimous vote should have the roll call. I like that. But let's for the past one, if they do their best and add it to this, is that okay with you?
Yeah, yes. Do your best from the tape or perhaps from notes. I'm not sure what you have. I know I voted against it. I'm pretty sure Russ voted against it. I don't know who the other two were.
So this is Robert Wright. We are talking about a roll call as opposed to a recorded vote. Otherwise, you could say it was passed 8-4, but what I'm hearing is you want a roll call vote of how every member voted, just to
Well,
be clear.
whether it's done by a roll call or whether it's done by, somebody recording whose hands are up when it's a contentious vote, either way.
Well, could we just, maybe another suggestions, because we're in the conversation mode, we could say who would like a roll call of people's votes, and then we could just do our unanimous thing. Then we can do who's for, who's against, who abstains. Was anyone like documentation in the minutes of exactly who voted for what? Because then it would give everyone the opportunity to say, yes, this wasn't a unanimous vote, let's put the votes in. Is that a good way, Larry?
Any way it happens is fine with me.
Okay, I agree. I just wanted to kind of merge the two comments. So that's what we'll do going forward. If I forget Randy or another member of MDE staff, I think that's what we do. We don't do anything formally. That's our agreement. Anybody disagree with that approach? Tom?
It's not so much that I disagree. Your last statement had me question. This is a state-created entity. I think we have to follow the Open Meetings Act. So I think if it's unanimous, we all know who voted which way. But if it's not unanimous, you need a roll call vote, I think, to comply with the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you for that. So I guess then I'll modify the procedural change to MD, please remind us, put it in your protocol procedures to remind us when it's not unanimous, so we can be very clear who voted for and voted against. That help you, Tom? It's just how we get it done. Thank you, everyone. So we entertain a motion and a second for approval of the minutes. The change requested was to add the vote from that event. And with those changes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Is there any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstention?
I think your new members will abstain, of course.
If that's how you want to be recorded, I'm happy. So Randy, that solves that. And then in the minutes for this meeting, if you could note that we're going to do a roll call for non-unanimous votes in the future would be useful.
All right, very good. And then all very timely, as one of our first briefing presentations today is about AQCAC procedures for the benefit
I saw that. That's on my introduction and the minutes, and then I think we're going to jump into the meat of the meeting. And Randy, are you doing that, or is who's leading that charge?
I'm sorry, just one second. That was the I was writing the first action item.
Yes,
Is that what
the motor vehicle anti-tampering should be next.
That will be myself and John Artis will be doing this presentation. So it's a combination presentation.
Great, jump in.
Okay, very good. Thank you all. This up 1 second. Okay, for those council members that were at our meeting in June, this is well, I don't know if anything's a familiar topic after it's been almost a year. This was one of the most recent regulations that the department had brought before the council. This is a regulation on vehicle emission tampering amendments. And both myself and John Artis from the compliance program will be going over this presentation. This is just a reminder that AQCAC meetings are recorded, as we had started earlier. And all of our meeting minutes and items are posted up on the department's webpage. We will send out this reminder link to all the council members and participants later. It hosts our agendas and our meeting minutes, and all the presentations that we give will ultimately be posted here, as well as a recording of the webinar sessions. So today we'll just be going through a bit of a refresher on that vehicle tampering regulation that we had brought before the council in June, going through the regulatory background on what that regulation, the past regulation had previously accomplished, as well as discussing some proposed amendments for the exemptions of the wholesale auto auction and insurance industry. We'll also be providing you with some compliance updates on both training and some of the efforts that are being made to notify the affected sources about compliance issues, as well as some actions that have already been taking place both federally and through the state. And then a regulation adoption schedule should we move forward with this proposed amendments today. So, John, were you? Yeah, you were just take us through. Let me introduce John Artis. He's our well-respected engineer with our compliance program, and he'll be assisting you through this.
So, hi, everybody.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Tad, just a real quick snapshot of why this is important to the council. I know we've done this in the past, but this issue of tampering with vehicles has been one that's really come into the forefront over the past couple of years. If you were to have asked me 5 years ago, is tampering with vehicles a big issue? I would have probably said, I don't think it is. But what has happened over the past 5 years, starting with the Volkswagen case, where Volkswagen broke the law and paid multiple $billion in fine, it's really elevated the issue. It's now no longer just manufacturers who are being looked at, but it's local repair shops where tampering of vehicles is taking place, and it's become quite a big issue. So we moved forward, adopted a rule. We now need to make a couple changes, but this is actually a fairly big deal. And so, again, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have said probably not, but it is a pretty big issue these days. So John, I'll pass it back to you.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I think Tad covered most of this slide right there, but the important information that wasn't noted was the estimated emissions from tampered vehicles for the mid-Atlantic region are excess of 2,900 tons. So it's a significant source of emissions. Randy, can you hit the next slide? So tampering has two basic forms. It's either removing the hardware, filters, catalysts, and the stock emission control systems, and most commonly for diesel pickup trucks, that's the exhaust gas recirculation system, or the diesel particulate filter, or the SCR in the exhaust system, or it's replacing or altering the software or calibrations that control the engine operation, which is generally called tuning. An engine tuner is connected to the OBD port, and the computer is basically reprogrammed to allow increased engine emissions, higher power, or to prevent the onboard diagnostic system from recognizing that the vehicle has had parts removed to prevent a check engine light, basically making the engines operate at more power, more emission state than originally designed and certified by the manufacturer. Next slide. So in terms of a sense of scale, there in the next decade, close to 100,000 tons of NOx and 890 tons of PM could be emitted in the mid-Atlantic states due to aftermarket tampering. And EPA estimates 58,000 diesel vehicles have had their emissions completely removed. So this is a very widespread issue. Anyone who's driven on 95 or the highway has likely seen like large diesel pickup trucks emitting clouds of black smoke, either from a extra large exhaust pipe or even a hood stack straight through the hood of the car. So this is a visible issue, and it causes a large amount of emissions. And Randy, were you going to take it away from here?
Yeah, I got it. So as I think John had mentioned previously, the council had met last on June 14th, 2021. At that point, the Air Quality Control Advisory Council voted to recommend that the department adopt updated regulations addressing the tampering of motor vehicle emission controls. The department has had tampering regulations on the books for decades, as well as the federal government, to limit both the tampering of a vehicle as well as the operation of a tampered motor vehicle on roads. But regulatory language was pretty simple and straightforward. So we added some depth and additional clarifications to the language that was there, as well as adding some additional sections to it. So for the most part, the adopted regulation, and this is the part that's new. It prohibited the manufacture and the sale of tampered equipment that goes into vehicles. And the federal government has similar regulations in place as well. So in addition, the installation and use of any tampered device that negates a vehicle's air pollution control systems. In addition to that, the previous adopted regulation required a vehicle dealer or a business that sells, auctions, or transfers a vehicle to maintain records confirming that all pollution control systems are in operating conditions at the time of sale. So the true target of the regulation was to take a look at vehicle dealers that are selling these vehicles to the public to ensure that a tampered vehicle is not making its way back onto the roadway. And it also codified the department's rights to conduct inspections and surveillance of these new and used motor vehicles to determine compliance. So there's a record keeping and reporting section and a compliance determination section that was built into those regulations. Those regulations became final effective on February 7th, 2022. So they are in place now. But during the public hearing process, and my sense of timing is always terrible, especially when it's around the holiday. I believe it was in December. Representatives from the Insurance and the Wholesale Auto Auction Association have raised the concerns to the department over how the proposed regulations would impact their business. So in part, the intended target of these regulations was the retail transaction of the vehicles between a licensed dealer and a consumer. The proposed amendments that we are bringing forward today will exempt wholesale vehicle dealers and the auto insurers from compliance with these regulations, as specified under the conditions that are outlined in Section C of the reg that we're proposing. So essentially, wholesale vehicle dealers, they provide the marketplace for consigners to sell vehicles to licensed dealers, who in turn sell their vehicles to retail consumers. So these are usually on the scale of a large auction setting, and we do have representatives from the industry here today, should the council need more specifications about how this business operates. The ability to monitor and ensure a vehicle's emissions have not been tampered with is outside of the scope of what they're able to form or entail. It can be an elaborate process sometimes if you don't have, as John described previously, a very large smokestack installed on the vehicle, which is kind of obvious that maybe something's going on there, but it could also be a flashing of the electronic systems. So that's a little more cumbersome and technical to determine. The auto insurance industry essentially take ownership of a motor vehicle in association with total loss claims. So if a vehicle's been totaled, it's the ability to usually dispose of these vehicles at an auction to recoup some of the claim costs associated with it. So sometimes these are also sold off for scrapping or getting parts that are still functional of a vehicle that's been totaled. So the proposed exemptions will maintain the protections precluding the offering for sale of a motor vehicle to the public with tampered emission controls or the operation of such vehicles. So that's not going on. And John, if you look at a little bit about the enforcement.
Oh, hey, Randy, this is Carolyn Jones with MDE. I'm just going to interrupt for 1 minute before John gets back on and talks about the enforcement. The regulation changes that have been proposed were sent out in the agenda packet. They're on page 4. So if the council wanted to reference that language right now while we're doing the presentation or had questions, that's where the language can be found. And if at some point anyone needs us to put it up on the screen, we can do that as well. So just want to let everyone know that, and I'll let John finish the presentation.
Thanks, Carolyn. So MDE has already been working in partnership with EPA since 2007 on this issue. EPA has been very active in Maryland. They've settled 5 cases with penalties up to $150,000, mainly at repair or performance shops, which they cited for installing parts on vehicles, removing their emission controls. Last spring, in 2021, a compliance advisory was set by MDE to dealers, auctions, and trade organizations, making them aware that changes in the regulation were in process. And this spring, just a few weeks ago, a compliance alert was sent to vehicle dealers, auctions, and trade organizations, informing them that the rule was in effect and that MDE was going to begin enforcement and compliance outreach in the near future. So we also had training conducted last summer at CCBC. A hands-on training was conducted for MDE inspectors, where we went over a vehicle that and examined the different pollution control systems.
Good. And also the training, John, that we had with the Mid-Atlantic Regional Air Management Administration, where a number of states that have tampering regulations on the books got together and shared experiences, and John was one of the presenters at that training as well.
That's true.
Yeah, great job. So should the council move forward with recommending the department adopt these regulations, we will have a notice of proposed action for this, the amendments to this reg in June. The hearing will be scheduled in July with a potential notice of final action in the September timeframe and a final effective date being October of 2022. That's what we have for you today. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So, questions?
Oh, I'm sorry, wrong John. Our esteemed chair, John Quinn. There's too many Johns.
I guess I'll open it up for questions from the council, and then we'll see if anyone else on the line has questions.
Yeah, this is Bob Wright. I have a question, which is how do you know that a vehicle has been tampered with? I guess if you open up the hood and you're familiar with engines and you see components that are not normally there, you might suspect that. But I mean, do you take an OBD and plug it in and it tells you whether it isn't set at the factory preset? Or so I'm just curious how one determines that a car has been tampered with, or a truck, a light truck.
Sure. Randy, I'll take this one if that works. So basically, what you said is correct. I mean, it's kind of, it can be very easy or it can be very difficult, and there's both hardware and software changes. So the most obvious is what they call a full delete, where you open the hood and you'll see that the exhaust gas recirculation valve, which is supposed to recirculate exhaust gas from the exhaust back into the intake, is not there. It's been normally blocked off with a typically shiny metal block off plate. And then the pollution control train in the exhaust has been removed with a straight pipe. So normally there'd be a diesel particulate filter and an SCR, and basically things that look like mufflers in the exhaust that you would see. And they would, in a deleted vehicle, it's just a straight typically large diameter pipe running from the engine through the back of the exhaust. In terms of the software, like there's another possibility there. Like there's lots of tuners, that's what they call them, where they plug into the OBD port and they retune the vehicle. Those are harder to detect unless they're physically connected to the vehicle, like at the time. But by attaching a scanner to the OBD port, you can confirm that the software originally installed with the vehicle is still the one that's installed, and as well as monitor various parameters that are look like expected to be in the range that they were originally set.
I don't know if that answered the question, but I have a follow-up. So
Sure.
I heard you say a visual check or a computer check, but how are they initiated and who's responsible to report the finding? If you could give us that real quickly.
So sure. So at present, it's the dealer's responsibility to confirm that the vehicles have all of their air pollution controls installed and operating at the time of sale to be in compliance with this regulation. So presumably when they get a vehicle, like they have the experience as a vehicle dealer, they would have mechanics available and they would check that the vehicle met the emission control standards. Like, I mean, from MDE's perspective, like as a follow-up and as part of the inspection process, like we've been going through these trainings to identify and confer what tempered vehicles look like. But as the mechanics of the role, like the dealer is responsible for confirming and keeping records that the vehicles that they sell have their emission controls installed.
Hey, John.
So at the time of sale or titling?
Sorry?
Do you mean, so the actual time that this is effective is at the time of sale or transfer, right?
Yes, it's the time of sale or transfer. That's correct.
Sorry if I overtalk someone.
So John
this is
or
John.
Bob, this is Tad. Just a little piece of background. One of the things that's interesting about this initiative is that one of the places we start is actually on the internet and in trade association magazines where people actually advertise either directly or indirectly that they are either in the business of tampering with vehicles or they are selling tampered vehicles. So that's where we start. After that, we do, there is some, you know, our staff goes out and looks at things and so we didn't emphasize it, but one of the things we did very early is we started the education outreach process with compliance advisories, even before these regs were adopted, because we were under the impression that a lot of this can be, we can start to make some of the changes we want, stopping tampering of vehicles, just by letting people know that we're going to be out enforcing the law more aggressively than we have in the past. And we do think that has had a role already. So it's a very interesting area where people actually advertise on the internet that this activity is going on. So, and again, we've spent a lot of time already doing that research, and now we're in the phase of actually going out and doing the enforcement. So it's been interesting. And as I said earlier, 5 years ago, I would have said this isn't a big deal. And that's one of the reasons it hasn't been aggressively enforced in the past. But now it's pretty clear it is. So we're moving in that direction.
Great answers. Thank you. Any other
John,
questions?
this is John.
Go.
John, can you hear me? This is John Kuhn.
Hi, John. We can hear you fine.
Great. Sorry, I had to call in because my internet connection wasn't very good. I have a question in the same vein about enforcement. John Artis, can you talk a little bit more about how the enforcement is done? Is it strictly audits? Is there remote monitoring available? How do the EPA and MDE work together? How are the state police involved? And are there enough enforcement enough enforcement resources to put teeth in the new regulation?
Sure. So the regulation just became effective February, so enforcement is just starting to ramp up. Like at present, we're focusing on the low-hanging fruit, which are vehicle dealers advertising that these tampered vehicles are for sale. So in terms of our partnership with EPA, like we haven't worked directly with any EPA cases, but they've been a big help with training and letting us know how to identify tampered vehicles. In terms of the state police, I'm not aware of any current partnership with the state police at this time, but I think that certainly could be an area of cooperation in the future, like being that the vehicles are visibly on the road, and the state police could help to identify and get vehicles that are violating the rules off the road. But at this time, I'm not aware of any current work, but Pat or Randy might be more have more information. Was there any other questions about that I missed?
Yeah.
How did the
Yeah.
5 cases that EPA has pursued, how were they initiated?
So I think EPA identified various diesel performance shops, presumably through the internet. I'm not sure where they came from, but then they basically, as my understanding, conducted a unannounced inspection of the facility, confiscated all of their records, and then came back and issued the violations.
Okay, so none of them have been initiated as a result of traffic stops. They're just sort of internet research initiated.
Yeah, I won't speak for EPA. It's possible that they pulled someone over and said, where did this happen? But I'm not aware of how they found that out. But at least a few years ago, it was very clear people were advertising, diesel performance shops were advertising, we'll take your controls off, like diesel delete, openly online.
John Kuma, a sort of a management answer to that is, do I think our enforcement of this rule will be effective? I absolutely do. Do I think it will be perfect? No. I mean, I got 30 inspectors. We already inspect about 10,000 sources. We have a lot of new programs that are pushing our inspectors to do even more like this one. The one we're not on the agenda talking about today is our work with environmental justice communities, where we're pushing enhanced enforcement in environmental justice communities and a whole lot of new enforcement on idling. And that is being done in partnership with MDOT and the state police. So there's a lot of pressure on my enforcement staff, and we do have to set priorities, and we do have to look for where to get the biggest bang for the buck. And that's why I mentioned the fact that the deterrent piece of what we do in terms of cleaning the air is sometimes just as important as the actual tickets that my guys go out and write. So is this going to be an effective program the way we enforce it? Absolutely. Is it perfect? No. I probably need a staff of about 20,000 people to make it perfect. So will it be effective? Absolutely.
That's kind of why I asked the question, because it's such a diffuse source. But is there, in that you mentioned that the idling enforcement activity is just bringing MDOT and the state police into play here. Do you envision the state police playing a role in enforcing this in the future?
That could happen. Right now, our focus with the state police is working on idling, because that's also an equally important enforcement initiative. But yes, John, you are correct. And again, for those of you that have watched the way MDE does its enforcement work for years and years, and we got folks like Todd on the phone and other folks who've actually worked for MDE, you know that a big part of the way we get the air pollution benefits is through the deterrent effect. And we use it quite a bit, and it's quite effective. And so a couple high-profile enforcement actions can go a long way in terms of stopping the behavior that we're trying to stop. So again, will this enforcement of this be effective? I absolutely believe it will be. I think we're already having an effect. Perfect? No, I've been doing this 30 years, and you know, we did just, there's always a need for more, but do we get the biggest bang for the buck? We absolutely do. Do we get the air quality benefits that we're trying to get? We absolutely do. So again, but great question. Like I said, this council makes us dance around a little bit. So
Understood.
Hi,
Thanks.
Tom Killeen here. I have a question.
You go right ahead, please.
Thank you. In the amendment, you're going to exempt wholesalers. So as we all know, or maybe not everyone on the phone call knows, several times these cars change hands without ever even being titled, I believe. In addition, what's the difference between dealers and wholesalers? Because dealers also wholesale cars. So if you have a dealer that is this a loophole? You have a dealer that wholesales cars. Is he not a wholesaler? Is there a license for both? So if you have a dealer that says he wholesaled a car and it wasn't checked, you know, where does that leave us? So hopefully someone can answer this question I have.
Tom, can you point me to which part of the reg you're looking at?
It was the amendment. It was an amendment to, there was an amendment previously. I don't have it on
Oh,
the
I see
screen.
somebody's highlighting it. Good. Okay, thanks.
So was my question clear? I mean, couldn't a dealer be a wholesaler and a dealer at the same time? Or is that possible?
So from the regulations for wholesale dealers, like they are not allowed to sell to retail customers. Like it's our understanding. So if you're a wholesale vehicle dealer, you can only sell to other dealers. And the intent was that that's not the wholesale transaction wasn't where we were trying to enforce this issue, since that vehicle will then be again sold to a retail customer. And then, as Randy explained, the wholesale transaction has logistical challenges due to the large number just the scale of wholesale sales.
And Mr. Quinn, we have members of the industry joining us this morning. If you wish to allow them to clarify that.
Yeah, but just for procedures, especially for the new people, the way I like to handle things is have the discussion among the council, so we don't, sometimes we can go on for hours without getting to council opinions. So I would like to continue this discussion with the council, and then our second tier will be the other people in attendance. Is that okay? And then if someone has a question that they want to direct to them, of course you have the authority to do that. But just let's continue our conversation first.
So this is Bob Wright. I have a question. I assume that the tampering is done because it improves gas mileage, or is it done because they somehow are getting by the regulation? So that's my first question. Why are they doing it? I assume it's to get better gas mileage. And of course, as the price of fuel goes up, I would expect then the tampering to also go up.
It's Mr. Wright, it's several reasons. I think the primary, as you find, and these are usually heavier duty diesel vehicles that are the primary type, like your big Ford F-Series trucks. A lot of it is just for a sense of aesthetics, where people like to have these smokestacks and what's known as rolling coal. It's kind of a thing to do, is to just display big stacks of smoke coming out of your exhaust. There are performance issues sometimes, setting quicker shift points on a performance vehicle as well, modifying the sound of the exhaust to be more aggressive. There are sometimes claims of improved gas mileage, but I think that's probably on the lower end of the spectrum. And John, I know you, Mr. Arties, you demonstrated in your presentation some additional reasonings. But I think that's probably the bulk of it, the majority.
Right. That's basically it. I mean, it's either to improve performance, like the faster acceleration, increased towing capacity. People improve reliability. People are concerned that if you're diesel trucks, particularly, like you have to fill up with the urea or DEF fluid, and if you remove the pollution controls, you don't need to buy and put DEF fluid in your truck anymore, which is probably the biggest reason people do it, to avoid purchasing DEF fluid. Oftentimes people's pollution controls wear out like around 150,000 miles, and it's a big bill to replace them, $5,000-$10,000. So instead of replacing the controls, they just put in a straight pipe. As Randy said, that potential for improved gas mileage, but generally performance, aesthetics, or just replacing an expensive part with one that's less expensive.
Good answers. Anybody else on the council have questions?
Yeah, Larry here, John.
Hi.
Good morning. So I was involved in advocating for the so-called anti-coal rolling or rolling coal bill in 2017. Just so for people who don't know, this was something, there was a switch in the cab of some of these diesels that people had put on that they could do exactly what was suggested. They blow a bunch of black sooty smoke, typically on low emissions vehicles. I had it done to me once because I had a bicycle on the rack on the back of my car. So that bill was passed. It's illegal now to intentionally do that, and it's my understanding that I haven't ever heard of anyone pulled over, but the state police could pull someone over for doing that. But we were told at the time that this switch inside the cab was a legitimate and legal modification to the emissions system that was done for performance reasons, some legitimate reason. I think I'm hearing now that that's no longer the case. I'd like some feedback on that. I would like feedback on, I understand enforcement in the wholesale and individual owner market may be difficult, but I don't understand why we need this exemption for wholesale. I'd like the department and the industry to address that if possible. And why would it not be just illegal to make the modification completely? I understand you may not have the resource to enforce it to every owner, but why even make it legal to do it at all? So I guess I have a lot of questions there.
So, Larry, John, maybe you could take the second, but I guess the first and the third are pretty much the same. The tampering regulations that the department has had on the books, as well as the federal, are going back decades. And the tampering of a vehicle's emission control systems have been illegal and continue to be illegal, both federally and with the state of Maryland. So,
so that in-cab switch was already illegal?
Correct.
Yep, that's right. Sorry, what
I know a little bit about that, Larry, but there wasn't a defined, the law, I believe, defined what the penalty was and gave clear, explicit authority on that highly political issue at the time.
I don't know the politics behind it. I just.
Well, there was a lot of people complained that year, and someone took up the cause gratefully, and I think they just wanted to address it, so they were very explicit on what that it was illegal and the penalty. I think there was another group. Yes.
That rolling coal bill, yeah, okay. Okay, so but the other part of the question, and maybe this happens later, why are we exempting wholesalers? You know, what's the explanation? What's the value to having that in there? You know, given the enforcement issue, I understand that. And then also, I guess it's already illegal to make the modification. Okay, I think that answers that part of the question.
John, would you like to?
Sure. So I think you'll hear from the industry in a little bit, but so the background behind the wholesale exemption was MDE was approached by the insurance companies and vehicle wholesalers regarding the impact of the rule as written on their current business practice. Like the insurance industry, with like your vehicle is totaled, you have to sell it to the insurance company. Like the insurance company purchases thousands of cars. They don't necessarily have any say in what they get. So for them to inspect each vehicle to determine if it was not tampered or not, and then also to install pollution controls on a vehicle that's been totaled, like we just created a logistical problem that was not, it was just a problem with the regs, like that needed to be updated as they explain the issue. The wholesalers is kind of the same thing. Like the wholesalers sell vehicles in such volume and in such scale, like thousands a week, that the ability to inspect each vehicle like would be a significant burden to that current business practice. They just, in order to look at each vehicle and see if it has emission controls or not, and then install them prior to the sale, it would just be a burdensome process.
And again, as a wholesale vehicle dealer, it's to licensed dealers and not to the public. And that's where the department's initial interest is where these vehicles are being sold to make it to Maryland roadways or other roadways. So, you know, it wasn't even really an industry that was on our radar under the development of the rules. So that's where we're really trying to put our focus of making sure that the licensed vehicle dealers to the consumer customers are understanding that they need to ensure that the vehicles are properly controlled for emissions.
Yeah, well, when we get to the point, I would like the industry to address that. I still don't see the reason why a wholesaler can't be as smart as a retailer. And as far as the insurance industry, it seems like exemption C1 could be augmented in some way to handle the transfer to an insurance company. And I'll be silent now.
To change things up, and we spend a little bit of time on this, and if someone else has another question on this, we can answer it. Otherwise, I'm fine with asking the industry representatives directly at this point. Bob, did you have your hand up? I just saw your hand waving.
I did. I was thinking that wholesalers aren't necessarily driving cars around on roads. They're generally either in a lot or they're being, transported, trucked from place to place. So unless someone can tell me that a lot of the vehicles that a wholesaler have are being driven, I don't think it's that important that we're exempting them.
They do drive them through auctions.
Yeah. I'm not good with GoToMeeting yet, so I can't see who's speaking. Who spoke that time? Tom?
That was Tom.
Good. Thank you. I'm so sorry for that. So if I didn't hear any objection to letting an industry representative, if they want to speak, answer the questions about wholesale and why wholesaling exemptions make sense. Is there someone on the line who would like to address that?
Yes, Karen Rye with the National Auto Auction Association is on the line.
Good
And
morning.
I think
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us. We appreciate the opportunity to participate. And I think it goes back to some things that have been talked about before, is that some of the tampering is easy to identify and some of it is not easy to identify and can be very burdensome. And it is a sheer volume, and the fact that it's not going into the consumer's hands, it's going to a dealer who is really the right person to be able to fix that vehicle should it need some repairs made. But a lot of it is just sheer volume. Does that make sense?
And this is Mark with Copart. And when we're talking about volume, we're talking about tens of thousands of cars per year. It's not like a typical dealership that you may be thinking of that sells, dozens a month. The volume is significant because there's a lot fewer locations. And my understanding from talking with the Department of Environment was the goal is to prevent the roadways from having vehicles that are polluting. And these vehicles that are sold dealer to dealer are not end users. They are being sold to be resold. And that's why with that, and as Karen mentioned, the high volume, there's no way we could logistically inspect, because we sell every type of vehicle. We're not just like sell Fords only or Kias only. It's every type of vehicle out there, and we don't have the logistics or the knowledge to inspect them, each one before auction. Hope that helps understand.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. It seems to me that you might want to sell things that aren't repaired. Some of the vehicles you're selling wholesale need repairs, new tires, new everything, or new major components, and you sell it at a discounted rate to another wholesaler who's willing to find a way to fix them. So would that be part of that calculus also?
Yes, it would. And also we'd also sell damaged vehicles, as mentioned earlier. I mean, there's no way to be able to repair some of the vehicles and to get the emission control devices repaired for some of the vehicles that are auctioned as well. And it was mentioned earlier, insurance, not all damaged vehicles are sold by insurance companies. They're also sold through other means and acquisitions.
And if I may, Mr. Quinn, Mr. Binder brought up another important issue that we failed to mention is, as John Arties could attest to, it's not every vehicle is built alike. The licensed dealers would have a much better, a Ford dealer, for instance, would have a much better sense of whether a Ford truck was tampered with. Each emission control systems, inspecting a Chevy Silverado is very different from a Ford F-150. So it does become more burdensome for an auction industry that's just selling so many different types of vehicles or passing along to other wholesalers vehicles.
Thank you, Randy. Larry, you were the leader on this line of questioning. Are you? Do you have further questions for the industry reps?
Well, I mean, when we get this up to motion, I'm gonna make a motion to delete that section of the language. I haven't been convinced that one expert and one large wholesaler selling to another or selling to a dealer can't at least get the same information that a retail dealer can. There are ways to write contracts so you put the burden on the seller. I mean, I don't know your market well enough, but it seems to me there are ways to do it. And there might be ways to write the regulations so at least the wholesaler has an obligation to disclose what they know, or at least to disclose that they don't know about some modification. I think there's a little more teeth that need to be put into this on the wholesale market.
This is Karen Rye again with the National Auto Auction Association. I just wanted to respond to one part of that, which is where you mentioned putting it back on the seller. I think one thing that needs to be understood is in this wholesale marketplace, many times the seller hasn't even seen the car. These are leased vehicles, so it might be the finance company who is the actual seller of the car, so they would not know the condition of that vehicle. And going back to the comment earlier about that, you know, a Ford dealer is going to know where it is in Ford cars, and it is different in different cars. I actually crawled under my husband's truck this weekend to look and see exactly what these things are, and then I had to pop the hood of my son's truck to look to see where his was. So everything is different, and I think that is probably the one of the main additions to the volume is that there is no consistency.
And I'm going to jump back in here. So I think one of the things Mr. Schoen said was he would like to see something. And one of the things he mentioned, if you had prior knowledge, you have to reveal. So maybe you should think about, as we're talking, and Mr. Schoen's going to bring up modification, you should think about what disclosure might be acceptable to you or you would support, and just to get your mind ready for the rest of our conversation. And so we can think about it in a detailed way. I'm not holding you to anything, but just I saw some flexibility in what he wanted. He just wants something more. Are there any other questions from the council?
Yeah, well, just so now that you have the industry individuals online, could someone address or answer the question, could an entity both have a retail license and a wholesale license? That's where I'm worried that it may happen where somewhere in the paperwork, something gets lost. And, oh, we sold that, we're a retailer, but we sold it as a wholesaler, so we didn't have to check. Thank you.
This is Karen with the National Auto Auction Association again. I can't respond to that, but I can get the answer to that because I'm not a licensing expert. But I would be happy to ask of our membership and try to get an answer to that question.
Thank you. So I'm opening up the council questions for either MDE or, and then I'm going to, just so you know how I'm thinking, ask questions, and then if any of the people on the line, we'll see if we can't accommodate a few of them if they want to make statements to inform this discussion. So next step is any more questions from the council of MDE or the other people on the phone?
John, this is Todd Chase, and just a quick question for MDE. How time sensitive is this regulation? In other words, if we were to decide that we needed additional information, could it wait until our June meeting?
I would just point out that as the regulation is currently written, it is inclusive of both of these industries. That was not the intention of the department. So I think for those industries' sake, they would like to see the amendments move through sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
So you think that we should move forward now, Randy, because it's good for the industry? Is that what you said?
I'm pointing it out as that's one of the factions of if there is a reasoning for time-sensitive nature, then as the regulation is currently written, it could have that sense of applicability.
So they more or less agreed to this, and you worked with them, is what you're saying, and so you might as well finalize it if we're going to go forward with it like it is, rather than wait.
I mean, the department has, the department's opinion, the department has looked at this issue. We have worked with the industry. We do not see this as being as a loophole. We see this as really still the burden of proof being on the licensed dealer where the vehicles are making it to the roadway. And that's where our enforcement efforts are to be concentrated, as well as those shops that may still be existing that are selling or installing these type of devices.
I get it. Any other questions from the council? So I'm going to go and offer, and if we could be concise, is there anyone from that's on the phone that's not a council member? I see there's 43 people on the call. I can't see who they are, but if we could keep it brief, and then there'll be time for follow-up questions from the council to them. Is there any other statements want to be made by people on the phone?
And Mr. Quinn, I failed to mention, I just wanted to point out that the department is not negating its ability to inspect these auctions as well. We do have the ability to go out there and take a look at them, make sure that sales are not occurring to retail customers and things of that nature. So we're not closing the door completely to that.
I get it. Is that a good approach to invite other people of the 43 to speak? Anybody object to that? Is there anyone that'd like to speak again, Karen or one of the other speakers? Do you want to address us in your own way?
This is Mark again with Mark Bender with Copart, and we would just ask for consideration of this amendment because we think it protects our industry as well as achieving the goal of vehicles off the roadways in Maryland that do not have emission systems or the ones that have been tampered.
Well said. Thank you. Very concise. Any other speakers?
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Hugo Carmona with Mannheim Auto Auctions. We're a member of the National Auto Auction Association. I agree with the comments from Mark and Karen. The auctions are the consignors. We're not the owners of the vehicles. And the vehicles that we wholesale are not purchased by consumers, and they're at least one step removed from being operated on Maryland roads and by Maryland residents. And one thing I'll also point out is many of the vehicles that we wholesale are sold to out-of-state dealers, that will more than likely eventually not sell that vehicle at retail to a Maryland resident. So just throwing that in for consideration as well. But appreciate the council's work on this issue this morning, and happy to answer any other questions.
Nice statement. Anybody else want to speak? I'm not hearing any. I'll go back to the council. Or do we want to have further discussion? Any further conversation here? If not, I'm going to go to Larry and let him make. Oh, I see Tom put his hand up.
It sounds like the major concern is wholesalers doing some retail. Could it not be regulation address a penalty or some other function if the inspection turns out finding that a wholesaler is selling at retail, that have a consequence?
I'll jump in. So there was already a question posed, and no one seemed to know the licensing difference between the wholesale and retail supplier, and maybe that law handles that already. I'm just answering just part of the discussion, Tom. I think it's a good thing. If there's already a prohibition on wholesale licensees from selling retail, then would we need that in the air quality regs?
Maybe I could rephrase it a different way. If you are a wholesaler who is on occasion sells retail, that retail item needs to be in compliance. That puts the burden on the wholesaler, because what I'm hearing from the dealers, we don't really do retail, but apparently maybe on some cases some people do. So bottom line is, even if you're a wholesaler and you want this exemption, you don't get the exemption if you sell retail.
So that's a modification to the exemption for wholesalers. That would be a modification to that sentence. Mr. Dernoga, is that right?
Yes.
Any reaction?
John, if I may add, I think the way the current regulation is written in D4, as I have highlighted, essentially, if a dealer was acting in capacity as a licensed dealer to offer for sale or lease to, it's not, I believe they would already be covered under the way the regulation is currently structured, and will continue to be for that sense, even with the exemption.
And so a person doesn't apply to a wholesale exemption? Is that what you're saying?
So if the wholesale exemption is provided within the regulation as proposed, the structure of D4 still applies to a licensed dealer selling to a retail customer. So I believe if we are to find out that they're operating in two different fashions, this should still be applicable.
I haven't evaluated the regulation set in its entirety in that light. So you're confident that the wholesale exemption does not apply to the anti-tampering section?
And John, maybe you can help clarify this just for your understanding. John's our compliance inspector, but we still envision that this regulation as structured would prevent a licensed dealer from selling to a retail customer, even with the exemption for a wholesale auction dealer. So long as they are acting in the capacity as we defined as a wholesale dealer selling wholesale volumes of cars, as they've described their business model. If they were to turn around and there was a retail customer say, I want to drive this out of the shop today and put it on the road, the regulation as written would preclude that. John, is that correct?
Yes, I mean, that was the intent, that a non-wholesale transaction would be a violation of the rule. Like that, our understanding was that a wholesale dealer could only sell to other wholesalers. Otherwise, they wouldn't be considered a wholesale dealer for the purpose of that transaction.
Yeah, this is Carolyn Jones. I just wanted to, reiterate that we took a little bit of that into consideration when writing the reg too, because if we say a wholesale dealer can't sell to retail, but then we add the exception of, but if you do sell to retailer, then you are subject to the reg, it was contradicting itself. So we're feeling that the definition of the wholesale dealer sufficed. And then if the unfortunate situation where it was sold to a retail dealer, then it is covered under D, like we were pointing out, or C4.
So
Would the person who just spoke run by that again so that I can understand it?
Yeah, this is Carolyn Jones with MDE, and I work with Randy and John. And we were just saying the definition of the wholesale dealer selling to other dealers and not to the retail, that definition alone should not allow them to sell to retailers directly. So as opposed, so if we're standing by that definition, allowing an exemption that contradicts the definition that the wholesale dealer is only selling on an auction level, contradicted itself.
So Tom Kalina, I'm a bit confused. So if a retail dealer takes a trade-in from a customer and then they wholesale it, and then it gets wholesaled again and wholesaled again, it eventually ends up at a retail store of some sort. So who would be responsible for checking that the vehicle is not tampered with? The end user or the end seller, I guess? Is that what I'm looking? That's what I'm thinking?
No, it's the retail dealer, like the person who go in and buy the truck from. They're the one who's responsible. And it just as a brief aside, from the MVA's website, it clarifies that wholesale dealers cannot sell vehicles to retail customers. Like so the licensing agency says that if you're a wholesale dealer, you cannot sell vehicles to retail customers.
But yeah, and Tom, you are correct. The last sales place is the one that is responsible. So it can change hands 5 times at an auction level, but then that last dealer that's selling to the retail is the place that the inspections and the enforcement will be happening.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. Just Randy, could you just clarify, are you relying on this definition that you've highlighted here on the licenses along with the amendment to say that the language that you then relied on about the prohibitions would not apply to a wholesaler who's violating the license to deal to the public? Is that your train of thought there?
I think I understand you correctly. The exemption is set out to make the regulation not apply to the wholesale dealer as defined. Those who transaction wholesale vehicles within an auction marketplace, but not selling directly to the public. Those are typically sold to either out of state or to other licensed dealers within Maryland that then sell these vehicles to the public. These first 2 categories here of new vehicle dealer and used vehicle dealer are the ones that the regulation pertains to, and or should be doing the inspections to ensure that the vehicles have not been tampered with, as defined under the Motor Vehicle Administration licensing of different types of dealers. They may not sell to the public. Is that getting to the point you were looking for clarification?
Yeah, so you're looking to this to say if they are selling to retail, they're no longer qualified under their license, wholesale license.
And this is, there are, as with many industries, there's several layers of regulations that apply to different industries, and this is the licensing procedure as coming from the Maryland Vehicle Administration. So they would be in violation of their wholesale dealer license if, while acting in the capacity of a wholesale dealer, it appears that there is the ability not to sell to the retail public.
And in that aspect, the wholesale exemption wouldn't apply to them. The proposed wholesale exemption wouldn't apply to them.
If they were acting as let's just say they have the ability to act in two capacities, they would have to, to me, it would read, they would have to clearly distinguish themselves as just a typical new or used vehicle dealer, as opposed to a wholesale dealer at that time in their traditional business practice. Now, I want to get into it because this is another administration and their requirements, and it's even the trade associations, they're not a licensing expert, and neither am I. But it appears it's.
So I wonder, I mean, one way to handle one of these, at least part of this issue, would be to add to the definition of 5, someone who does not sell to the retail public, because you also mentioned in the regulation definition in number 5, or issued by another state. Now, you showed us Maryland's regulation, but we don't know what other states' regulations are going to say. Another related issue to other states that I haven't quite thought through, but one of the defenses of exempting the dealers, well, they might just sell it out of state. So are we setting up Maryland to be a conduit for vehicles to go to other states and do these emissions? And another thought that occurred to me, really, we don't want these vehicles on the road at all if they've been modified. And there's nothing in here that says you can't drive it around while it's, well, I guess maybe you're going to tell me that's covered by another regulation.
It is. Sorry, Mr. Schoen, but that both from a federal perspective and a state perspective has been a regulation for decades. So,
all right, so forget about that part of it.
Adding an extra layer within Maryland is that the licensed dealers are to inspect these vehicles to ensure, because certainly, yes, things can slip through the cracks, and other states may not be as aggressive with their ensuring that these vehicles aren't operating. And that's where you get into the point of other state police or whatever inspecting for those rolling coal incidents, which are much, much more visible, but detecting a software reflash is not as easy from a visual inspection.
So does anybody see a problem with adding the clause and who does not sell to the retail public to the definition in 5?
This is Karen with the National Auto Auction Association. I'm wanting to make sure that we're clear on everything as well too, and I'm wondering if adding another exemption that says that the offering for sale, auction, or transfer of a motor vehicle where the transaction is not consummated with a retail consumer. So that makes it clear that it's only exempt if the transaction is not consummated with the retail consumer.
I like that. Barry?
Yeah, I just worry about drafting real time.
Well, this is Bob Wright. So can somebody actually type that in so that we could see where it would go and we would know the words? I mean, that's typically done in these virtual meetings. Somebody has that skill.
I'm just going to ask, Carolyn, are you able to bring up the Word document?
Go to the folder above this, or you're not in the M drive? Okay, I might be able to, yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do it yet. That was a mistake on my part. All right, just give us a moment here and we'll bring that document up.
Oh, and just in case we don't get there today, I have no problem recommending we move forward and telling them to go through, and then we can deal with it at another time if we don't have to. Don't anybody feel pressure. We have to complete this today, is my opinion.
Okay, we have it up online now. Carolyn's sharing her screen.
Okay.
So, and you're gonna I think Karen dictated.
Yes.
If you could dictate it again, that would be great.
Yeah.
So in my mind, this would be a new paragraph D, and it would be the offering for sale, auction, or transfer of a motor vehicle where the transaction is not consummated with a retail consumer.
Gianna, please get out of the sink.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Why would that just simply not be a replacement for items C and D?
I'm sorry, that last portion of it, not consummated with a.
Retail consumer.
Thank you.
With a.
It's not consummated with a retail consumer.
Oh, sorry.
I want to know how the sync thing went.
Okay.
Do I have it up? Did you lose it?
No, it's
No,
there.
it's still there, Carolyn.
So that would be, I'm just trying to, it's small. So exemptions, why is it D rather than under C?
Why wouldn't that language simply replace C and D would be my question. And should we, for consistency, instead of retail consumer, should it say retail public like the licensing reg?
You think quickly, Larry. That's why we need you.
So
yeah, it could be, well.
It could be an addendum to the way C, sorry, I'm looking at the small text too, C1C, C1C.
Mr. Chairman, if I might.
Yeah, Mr. Lawyer, please chime in.
Larry, in concept, assuming that this language is corrected so that it really ties into the retail offering, does that solve your concern, subject to the language being fixed? Or do you still have a concern?
I still have a concern, but I'm starting to be convinced by the department saying that where the rubber meets the road is really where they're going to enforce. And I'm trying to hear the industry's concerns and also the department's assurances. So I think it would go a long way. But what's your reading on it, Todd? Do you think it addresses the concerns that have been raised?
So the biggest concern that you expressed that I share is that of live drafting. And so if we can address your concern at a high enough level that we can at least get to a vote on the concept, I'd suggest that we let the department and its counsel figure out the best way to implement it and to send it around to us to look at after the meeting. I'm also concerned about the rest of the agenda. But I think that trying to wordsmith this in real time, if at least in concept we've addressed your issue, is a dangerous thing.
Todd, this is Tad, and I was going to sort of say the same thing. I appreciate you jumping in there. We've done this in the past. We would be happy to not only take what we've heard today, create the amendment, pass it by key council members, but this would also allow us to move forward relatively quickly. So that's certainly an option we've used in the past, John.
I suggest we go that route. So let's define the concept. And the concept is retail sales by a wholesaler we want to make sure it do not occur under the exemption. Is that right, Larry?
Yeah, that goes a long way towards satisfying my concern. I'm still not convinced that somehow there aren't some way to put some teeth into the earlier transfers and not disadvantage out-of-state potential buyers or further dealers. Disadvantage in-state by moving the market to the out-of-state. And maybe that's something else that could be considered when if the department's going back to look at this regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Schoen. I just wanted to follow up on that. And I never consider any regulation that we write as final. I think some of these issues do evolve over time. It is something that we are still examining. And, we have internal questions ourselves with some of these things, and the department has considered a further review. And at that time, we may be bringing back some of these issues to the council as we are more settled internally on them ourselves.
So I think it's the will of the council, and people are going to pull me back, but maybe we'll have a slightly more discussion, just council members. Is this okay if we move forward? We charge MDE with finding language to address Mr. Schoen's primary concern, and otherwise we take a vote to move forward with a final check off by email. Does that work for everyone? Does that work for Tad?
John, it does. Thank you. Had to get off
All
mute.
right. I'll do another round of discussion after a motion. I'll entertain a motion to move forward with the conceptual change, and with that conceptual change, approving the regulations subject to email send out of the exact language chosen. So I know that wasn't very good. I heard the motion second.
I move so. This is Sania. I move so to do that.
Thank you. I'm open for further discussion. Anyone want to stop this approach?
This is Bob Wright. I don't want to stop the approach. I just think that between Larry and whoever he's working with, not to go too far because it will raise additional questions. That's my only comment. But
I don't want to take full ownership. I don't want to take full ownership for this. First of all, I think I did hear somebody else, I can't remember who, expressed the initial concern about the wholesale, and might be wholesaler who's also a retailer or whatever. And I also don't think it's just me working with somebody. What I heard is the draft is going to go out to the entire council with the modification.
And I think that was my thing. And we're only addressing the wholesale sale to retail customers at this time. The other things we're not trying to address. Larry said that handled predominantly all of his concerns.
Yeah, and I would see if that simple language can replace C and D. So whether it's to insure, whether it involves an insurer or involves a wholesale dealer, as long as it's not consummated with the retail public, which is how the license was.
Great. So I'm going to take the vote now because we've had our discussion, and we'll all in favor of moving forward in the way described.
Aye.
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 Any opposition? So that's how we'll go, and we can record it as unanimous vote, and we don't have to do a roll. Thank you. Let's jump to the next item on the agenda. We're 37 minutes past what we thought we'd be. I'm happy we had the discussion. We have to dig in, and that's our job. Randy, if you can move us to the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn, and I greatly appreciate your facilitation of this. This one should be a speedy subject, and we should be moving quickly on to our briefing items. So the next proposed action is for our agricultural installations amendment to COMAR 2611-1805C. This is a very straightforward and simple regulation where the department noticed within our current existing regulations that the record keeping period for facilities affected under this chapter were simply required to keep records on site for a 60-day period to be consistent with the department's typical compliance period of 5 years. That is all that the department is looking to change within the regulations, moving that from 60-day period to 5 years. There is only one facility that is affected by this regulation. It's the Valley Proteins in Linkwood, Maryland. And so this is it. I'll just bring it to this. As you can see, the regulation, this is the only change that is being proposed, this small section right here.
And what does that facility think about this change?
I believe they're on board. I haven't been in communication myself. We have two of our compliance personnel here, partners, and Scott, if either of you are able to talk about your discussions with them.
And it says two sources, so
Yeah,
address
that's
that.
We realize that Valley, that's a mistake. Thank you, Larry. We'll have to change that. Valley Protein does own two facilities within Maryland, but only one of them is a rendering plant. So we're going to make that change. Thank you.
So is someone speaking up on what their opinion is?
Scott Thompson or Pars or either of you? I thought you were online. Carolyn, did you have it muted?
I'm here. Randy, this is Pars. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I talked to the corporate guy at Valley Protein, and I explained to him that the reason is the permit to operate is for 5 years, and the record keeping is typically the term of the permit, and also the statute of limitations of enforcement action is 5 years. And so once we had a 5-10 minute discussion on his concern, but I think he was okay, and he said, well, he's not going to debate me on the issue.
And thank you, Pars. That's very useful information. Is there anyone on the call from that facility?
While we're waiting, I have a question. Does scanning into a file folder that's accessible on site, does that count as on site?
It's these days, I mean, they're all on data acquisition systems. It's all on computer. I don't see it's a burden these days. Back in when Chairman Quinn was inspecting the plan back in the 80s, it was all paper copy.
We use stones and chalk. So I'm satisfied, and I don't have any further questions. Any further questions from the council to MDE? I see.
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have one. What was the thought process behind the 60 days that they had to keep their paperwork previously? I'm supportive of this because I understand, you know, when you're renewing the permit, you want to look at what they've had to go through over the last 5 years on a variety of categories. But was there a thought process to why the last 60 days? I'm just curious.
I believe that reg was before any of our time, and most of us been around close to 35, 40 years.
So the answer is everyone's retired that has previously written that regulation.
It's a modernization of an ancient reg.
Yeah. Stone tablets were hard to come by back then, I guess.
Yeah.
Some of you remember Carl York. This goes back quite a ways. We just know now that we need to improve it.
I'm just going to shortcut this. It seems like this is cut and dry. From my opinion, I might be wrong. My suggestion is I get a motion to approve this change and a second. Larry, I see you're motioning. Who's second?
I will second it, Bob Wright.
Thank you, Bob. Any further discussion? All in favor of passing this, recommending this regulation to move forward?
Aye.
Aye.
If you make a noise, I'll see the green light light up. Good. Anybody opposed? Anybody wish to be recorded as abstention? And not hearing any, we're done with that one. Thank you very much. Randy, up next.
Thank
John, just real
you.
quick, it's Ted. This was a really great session on our action items, and we appreciate the councils, but you guys do make us work hard. We have a very complicated regulation we're going to be bringing to you in the next, hopefully, 6 months. Methane emissions from landfills. We might need to think about doing an informational session first on that because I love the comments. You guys work hard. They're always useful, but we might want to think about having an informal working session on that regulation before we bring it to an action session, because it's going to be an order of magnitude more complicated than the stuff we talked about today. So just a thought, something we can plan for.
But Tad, if I could advise you that we all really know how to read well, right? We do that all the time. If you can send something out well ahead of it, we review it. Still have the information session, but we can go through the information session a lot quicker if we have as close to what you want to present as you can well ahead of time. Because lots of times I get, we get the details a few days before these, and it's a busy time. I don't read it till the morning of. I always read it the morning of, but sometimes that's not enough for intricate regulatory details. So I really strongly urge you to get something out well ahead of time that's close to your final recommendation for regulation. And
Totally agree. Sounds like we have a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. And in addition to that, as we've done with other complex regulations in the past, we will extend our invitation to the council to sit on any stakeholder meetings that we may have where we're going through these issues. So we will certainly do that in this case.
Thank you. I know you do a great job. I can't believe all the work you do so well. So don't take that as criticism. I just need more time. It's me. It's my project management skills.
I need more time as well with a lot of these complex ones. Thank you. So John, are we moving on to the briefing sessions?
As fast as you can.
Thank you so much. I would like to just quickly take the time to introduce to you Kelsey Cisco, who's a natural resources planner with the department. She is the one who's been communicating with the council recently and arranging and facilitating and setting up all these fine meetings. We're just having a presentation up today to just as a refresher for the existing council members and also for the benefit of the new council members, just to go through the past AQCAC facts about how the council was developed and also the bylaws and process that we go through. As we just discussed this morning, we're going to make some probably changes to that coming up. So Kelsey, please. You're muted. Do we need to unmute you?
Notice that now. Yeah. Can everybody hear me? We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelsey. Yes, I just started back in October. So this is my first AQCAC meeting, and I am looking forward to hopefully meeting everybody in person one day soon, but for now, this will do. So yes, I've been the one communicating with you. So putting a face to the name now. So yeah, we're just going to talk about some bylaws, the facts, just a quick refresher for everybody. Okay, so to start here about the AQCAC description, the council was created in 1963 and it was originally known as the Air Pollution Control Council. This council was a part of the voting process on regulations for the department, and these regulations would not move forward without the approval from the council. The legislation changes made the council an advisory role, meaning we can still move forward with the regulation regardless of the voting outcome. And like I said before, MDE, the council advises MDE on the proposed air quality regulations. Our regulations are being considered in order to achieve air quality and public health goals and to protect the environment. Before MDE can adopt a rule or regulation, we must submit the proposed rule or regulation to AQCAC to vote on. The council can either recommend adoption, rejection, or modification of the proposal, but 99% of the time, if you guys reject or want modifications of the proposal, we won't move forward with it. We'll go back, make those changes, and then present at the following meeting or in the future.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. All right, so next up, some membership information. So AQCAC's representatives are in a variety of different occupations. In total, AQCAC has 15 members appointed by the MDE secretary from industry, labor, professional associations, local and regional government organizations, academia, and 2 representatives from the general public. The following list here includes the 15 positions that the council represents. I'll leave this up for a few seconds just so everybody can read who's not familiar with it, but just a reminder that this list is on MDE's website. Alrighty, so the selection and appointment process. When there is an open position on the council, we do try our best to refill that position by looking upon the resigning council member, if and when possible, for a recommendation. We also ask other members for recommendations when a vacancy arises. MDE does have a list of contact groups to search for a new member, and once we find a candidate that we think best fits that position, we'll reach out, and if they're interested, they're evaluated by the MDE secretary, and then if approved, they will receive a letter of appointment and a certificate from the secretary as well. So terms are on a 5-year basis, but while terms are only for 5 years, many of our council members quite often get reinstated for another term. If a member does not want to be reappointed, they may serve until their position has been filled, and the chairman and vice chairman of the council are selected and appointed by the MDE secretary. All right, so last is just about the meetings. We meet on average 4 times a year, and our meetings are currently hosted virtually. But if meetings go back to being in person, they'll be held at the MDE office at 1800 Washington Boulevard in Baltimore. Virtual will always become an option for meetings now, even if we do start hosting them in-house again. 2 weeks before each meeting, an agenda and draft regulations are going to be emailed to members for review. Local and regional agencies in the Region 3 Environmental Protection Agency office are also notified. And just a reminder for everybody that all the materials and the meeting schedules are available online on MDE's website. So from here, I will hand it off to Randy to talk about the bylaws.
So thank you, Kelsey. Great job. I just wanted to point out that the council had previously voted upon the bylaws that we had on the books in 2016 with some minor amendments, in more bringing them in line with to conform with Robert's Rules of Orders. As quite excellently demonstrated by our chairperson and vice chairperson, Mr. Quinn, you all are very familiar with how the process works within the council. The chairperson is responsible for opening the meetings and setting the time for when the council is able to meet. Announcing the business of order before the council as we move through the process, stating and putting all votes in motion, and announcing the results of the votes as we go through. We'll be probably providing some amendments to this for a recommendation to the council as we move forward, recognizing the adding the vote count and the roll call to match when we don't have unanimous decisions. So that'll be coming soon. And just to point out, if the chairperson is not able to attend the meeting, it is the vice chairperson, our esteemed Mr. John Coombe, who will assume responsibilities as the chairperson for that meeting. The Secretary of the Environment shall appoint a secretary to the council. This is traditionally been the director of the Air and Radiation Administration, who then sets his designee, which over the past 14, 15 years has been essentially the Regulation Development Division. And I'll give most credit to Ms. Karen Jones, who's just fantastic at documenting all the complex topics that we discuss here. Council members are required to attend. They may attend by phone webinar, but they're encouraged to attend in person when we do have in-person meetings. Should try to attend at least 50% of the meetings that we have during any period annually. If the council member is not able to meet the attendance policy, it's typically the role of the department and the chair to reach out to the council member and see if there's a reason for the absence. We do look into extenuating circumstances and do our best to try to work with people's schedules and why they may not be able to attend. Council members may vote in person, by phone, or via webinar. I think this is probably another important area that we may want to make an amendment to the bylaws for instances that we just had with the tampering regulation. Should council members wish the department to go back and submit something via email, we will extend our vote to that as well. Any council member has the right to make a motion for a vote at any time throughout the meeting. And when a quorum is present, a majority of vote is sufficient for the adoption of any motion. Regards to that, did I move that already? I think I did. Council members may vote in affirmative, negative, or abstain from voting. The chairperson may protect their impartiality by exercising their voting rights only when their vote would affect the outcome of such a meeting. If the chair abstains, he or she will announce the result of the vote with no mention of their own vote. So should the vote result in a tie, in any case, no recommendation will be made to the department, which we've never had happen. So at the discretion of the chairperson, members of the public may be allowed to address the council, and that goes for stakeholders as well. We do typically, when we do have a big agenda or very complex regs, we try to request that the public or stakeholders do limit their comments to be less than 5 minutes, sometimes less than that. At the discretion of the chairperson, additional time or less time may be provided. And then again, after the public has addressed, the council member chair will usually go back to the council to further ask questions upon those individuals. So the bylaws, as we're probably going to find out soon, they may be amended by an affirmative vote of at least 8 council members at a council meeting. And we do get these out at least 14 days before a meeting for the council to review. So we do keep the standing rules consistent with bylaws. Again, voted by a majority of the meetings, so long as we've gotten the text every time. And that is a quick rundown. We will be going back and probably pulling the bylaws together and some of the issues that we heard today and presenting that to the council prior to our next meeting. So thank you all very much. We appreciate this opportunity to go through this. We're here if there's any questions. Okay, Mr. Quinn, again.
John, if there are no questions, just one point from Tad, which is that one, you've just heard from Kelsey Cisco, who's one of our up and coming young people. And so hopefully you're going to be hearing a lot more from her in the future. She's really been a pleasure to work with. So point one. Second is I value this council and your input. We have worked very hard to make this a very good council. It is probably the best council we've ever had. It is maybe one of the best councils I've ever worked with. It makes our meetings hard. And gotta remember, Ross wasn't even on the phone today, so we really appreciate your input on ways to make things better. One of the things that we're trying to do right now is to add some members to the council who have a focus on racial equity, environmental justice. So if folks have thoughts on that, please let us know. That's one of our priorities, is to work on that over the next 6 months. So again, appreciate everything you all do, and it is a very good council. Even though you make, you give us, these are great meetings. My staff looks forward to them, but we always end up with more to do when we leave. So I think Tom has a question. So.
I would just recommend Jacoby Wilson. He's a professor at the University of Maryland, an expert on social justice.
You're actually, we're working with Dr. Wilson on that exact issue. So we're doing a couple. I'll give you a little briefing in a minute on one of the projects we're doing with him. It's really interesting stuff. So, but anyway, we appreciate everything you guys do, and be ready to work with Kelsey in the future because she's one of our up and comers. So thank you all.
And I'd like to just thank Mr. Bunker for attending today's meeting because he is one who is stepping down from the position of the general public, and that's where we're looking to fill that role within environmental justice. So, Mr. Bunker, we greatly appreciate you being able to attend for today and continue your work with the council.
Well, thank you. Just let me know when my work is done.
Thank you.
Thank you, and just let me know when your work is done, or my work is done.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So moving on to the show we've all been waiting for, Tad will be presenting and Megan Ulrich on air quality progress and community partnerships.
So thank you, Randy. And I know we're tight on time. We always put these briefings at the end so that we get the action items done, but sometimes that means we lose people. So this is a presentation some of you have seen before. This is updated. We're focusing on two things: the progress we're making with air quality, as well as some of the work we're doing with communities and environmental justice. I am doing this as a tag team. Megan Ulrich is going to be helping me in this presentation. Megan is my key policy advisor who's taking on a bigger and bigger role these days. She's also one of the key people that into the future, AQCAC will get to know quite well. So here's what we're trying to cover. It's a little background, some progress, and then environmental justice work. So the basics, you can move on. Again, this is a little basic for many of you, but ground level ozone has been our toughest problem. It's been a problem my entire 30+ years. Again, a bit complicated because ozone's formed in the atmosphere by a complex set of reactions between nitrogen oxide, volatile organic compounds, heat. It's been a big challenge, and it's not just from power plants, and it's pretty much everything you can look at has some role in creating ozone. So it's been a big challenge. Next slide. Fine particles, probably the highest risk air pollutant we cover under the Clean Air Act. Really complicated. There's some photochemistry involved in forming fine particulate as well, some direct emissions as well, many, many different sources. But to be honest with you, this might be our biggest success story. We'll go through that in a minute, but we went from having very, very high fine particle levels to constantly improving fine particle levels. We're still working to lower fine particulate in the state, but it's so much better than it used to be. We'll show you some data on that in a minute. Next slide. A little history. This is going back to even before me. In the old days, the air pollution program got started because you could see the pollution. You had terrible events like Denora, Pennsylvania, London, New York City, where the smog was so bad that you couldn't see through it and you literally couldn't breathe the air. That's the very beginning of the air program, and it was quite ugly. Then there was a period in the middle up until about 2010 when Maryland had perhaps one of the country's worst air pollution problems. In a very famous 2005 MIT study, we were identified as the riskiest place to breathe the air anywhere east of the Mississippi. And then in 2008, EPA designated the Baltimore area as having the worst ozone anywhere outside of California and Texas. So we had some big issues right up until around 2010 when things started to change quite a bit. Next slide, please. More recently, and it is good, we are meeting the federal standard for fine particulates. We are meeting the 2008 ozone standard. We're getting closer, very close to the 2015 ozone standard. And again, for the first time in my career, we are within, arm's length of meeting all federal standards. First time in my 35-year plus career. So we've made a lot of progress. And I give the council a lot of the credit because most of the things we've done that have helped make this progress came through this council. And so you all should feel, you can tell I'm proud of the work we do, and you all should feel as proud of it as well. So next slide, please. I'm going to toss it over to Megan. And again, just Megan is one of our real up-and-comers, my #1 policy advisor. She's going to be going through some of the data, and then we're going to do another flip-flop. So Megan, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay. Thanks, Chad. Can everyone hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So my name is Megan Ulrich, as Ted said, and I'm a senior policy advisor for air and radiation. Hello to those of you that I don't know. So as has relayed, that the past 30 years, Maryland's air quality has drastically improved. This is where many of the policies and regulations have lowered the levels of the 6 most common pollutants, including particles, ozone, lead, carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. And you can see on the graph here that not only have they been lowered, but they have been drastically lowered. And we are attaining the standard for all of those pollutants, except for the 2015 ozone standard. And we are extremely close to meeting that standard as well. So the next few slides are a variety of graphs and images to kind of go through these points and show the progress that we've made. This first slide shows Maryland bad ozone days. And as you can see, in 2010, there were 61 bad ozone days in the ozone season, which means that ozone exceeded the federal standard. And that number has been steadily falling for the past 11, 12 years. Particularly, I just want to point out that as of 2017, it's getting increasingly low. I think as Tad alluded to earlier, 2020 was a bit of an anomaly due partially to COVID, and it also happened to be a very mild year weather-wise. But for the most part, we're seeing very low ozone days in around the 14 to 17 range, which is a drastic improvement from 61. So this is another way to look at the wonderful improvements that we've made in ozone. The first image on the left shows in 1998 that we were not only above the standard, but very far above the standard, including, unfortunately, some areas of the state that were even above 105. As you can see today, the vast majority of the state is attaining the ozone standard, and there's just a small portion that is not. But even that small portion, while it is not in attainment, is barely over. It's between the 70 to 75 range, which is why we really, truly are so close to attaining the 2015 ozone standard. You can also see how we are doing on the fine particle air pollution. The levels have been continually lowering in the state since 2002. And we are now well below the federal standard. And I believe there's another part that might come in on this slide, but we expect that these emissions will continue to go down due largely, just Tad said, to some of the great work that this council has helped with controls on power plants and possibly increased retirement of coal-fired power plants, and also the just great enhancements in vehicle technology controls to reduce emissions from vehicles. I guess. On the SO2, the majority of the state is in attainment for the SO2 standard. And as you can see here, the levels from 2019 through September of 2020 were all below the level of the 75 ppb SO2 NAAQS. There are a couple spikes that get close to the level, but the majority is well below the standard.
Megan, before you leave that one,
Air toxics have.
Megan, before you leave that last one, what was the color coding? I didn't get that.
Oh, that's okay. So the red is the Riviera Beach SO2 monitor concentration. And then the blue is the max hourly sum of Brandon Shores, Wagner, and Crane SO2 emissions each day. So it's hard to see because the graph is so small on the presentation, but so that's each day the max hourly sum is the blue.
And why is the blue data missing from that period, or seems to be missing from that? Or maybe it's not missing, it's just very low. In that 20.
That's showing when those sources are operating, so they may not have been operating during those periods.
Right, so some of the days they might not have operated at all, and some of the days it's just, if you're talking about like the 2020, February 2020 range to the May range, some of the days they might not have operated at all, and some of the days their emissions just would have been very, very low.
Got it, okay.
So air toxics have also been significantly reduced since the late 90s. You can see on here the toxics that we track and the change since 1995 to 2020, and just the overall significant decrease in levels. These air toxics are all related in some way to petroleum or oil, and they are known to cause cancer and other serious health impacts. And over the last 25 years, Maryland has generally cut concentrations by at least 50%. So this is also a significant progress. What has driven the progress? So as Taz alluded to, this council has helped a lot to make this progress in the past 30 years. Maryland has adopted hundreds of emission control programs to reduce air pollution. Some of the more high-profile efforts relate to power plants. One of them is the Maryland Healthy Air Act that was passed by the General Assembly. There's also the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, of which Maryland is a member, and the 2015 NOx regulations, which this council approved, which put further restrictions on power plants and daily optimization requirements. And the combination of those three have greatly reduced emissions, power plant emissions in Maryland. Additionally, we have the mobile source programs, the 2007 Clean Cars program, which was a regulation that also came through this council. The federal Tier 2 and Tier 3 tailpipe standards, and numerous diesel emission reduction efforts that the state has made, both voluntary and with funding. We also have some potential future emission reduction efforts. We have the federal action to reduce ozone being transported into Maryland. As Tad mentioned, there's a couple, actually a lot of related actions that are going on to this. But as Tad mentioned, on Friday, the EPA just proposed a new federal implementation plan that covers 26 states, and it is by far the most comprehensive that we have seen to date, including not only cap and trade, but also some daily emissions limits and more equitable cost thresholds, as well as non-power plant sources such as cement kilns and natural gas. There's also the zero emission medium heavy duty trucks, which I think we will go into more detail on this later, but there's also many actions moving forward on that, both an MOU that Maryland has signed on to, as well as action in California and recent action by EPA. And I'm going to hand it back over to Tad now.
Megan, I have a question. In the
Sure.
graph that showed ozone attainment, there was a yellow spot up on the Chesapeake Bay. Looked like it was right. What is that location? Can you describe it more specifically, and why is it occurring there?
Megan, I'll grab that one if you want, because great question, Bob. Thank you very much. That's sort of around the Edgewood, Maryland area. And the why is that transport comes to Maryland in multiple ways. It comes aloft from the west to Maryland. A Bermuda high weather system basically drags aloft air into Maryland from the Ohio River Valley. So power plants in the Ohio River Valley are one part of why it's high. The other piece is the ground level winds are from the southwest to the northeast. So we get all of that mobile source related pollution from the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, dragging up towards Maryland. And then why that little dot? Why is it more spread out across the whole state? Well, what happens is that ozone over the Chesapeake Bay becomes elevated for a whole host of reasons, including lower mixing heights. And so then what happens is the air patterns around the bay literally push Chesapeake Bay breezes, is what we call them. They push the high elevated, slightly higher elevated pollution that's captured over the bay back onto the land. And that's often where it ends up, right there in Edgewood, Maryland, or the Essex, Maryland, or the Fair Hill, Maryland. Right along the Chesapeake Bay is where we always see our highest ozone levels. This is not unique to Maryland. In Connecticut, which has right now the East's highest ozone levels, they see the same thing. Just downwind of their water body, and this in their case, it's the Long Island Sound, they see the highest level. So that's a little bit of where it comes from and why. I hope that answers your question, Bob.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Ted.
Okay, so real quickly, we don't want to do it too long, but one of our highest priority efforts right now is climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Several of you on this council sit in on one of our Maryland Climate Commission, either the full commission or the work groups, so you're very familiar with this, but this is amongst our highest priorities. We've already done a lot of work. We've been working on this about 8 years. We've had multiple plans. Our current plan drives about a 50% emission reduction by 2030, and so we're probably going to end up having to do more than that. Right now, we have legislative action that's maybe looking at something as high as 60% by 2030, with net zero by 2045. So this is about the hottest action area we have right now. So next slide, please. Just a map of where we are at the current time. The green line is sort of the current plan. It probably will actually get a little more than the green line says, but that's our current plan. The purple line was our earlier plan, the 2019 plan, and the upper line is sort of the business as usual slide. We've also identified on here the net zero by 2045 goal, which the Maryland Climate Commission already works for. It's likely to become part of the law at some point, maybe this year. So it's part of legislation that's being discussed right now. Next slide, please. One of the unique things, not unique, but one of the really important things about our law in Maryland is that it links deep progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions with the concept that we can still do that and have a net positive impact on the economy and a net positive impact on creating jobs. We spend a lot of time on this nowadays. We used to be all engineers, now we have economists. And so I'm not going to go through every one of these pieces of data, but you can get a quick snapshot of the kinds of things that we look at in terms of positive impact on the economy and a positive impact on jobs. This is a big piece of this effort. The emission reduction piece is by far what's driving it, but the link to the economy and jobs is absolutely critical. And to be honest with you, we think we can continue to make deep progress and in a way that it has a positive impact on the economy and jobs. So next slide, please. A little bit shifting into priorities. We're going to go through this really fast because there's a lot of priorities. And the climate change one, where you have a whole bunch of things right now. One of the most important things is a clean building approach. It's also part of the legislative discussion. It's very aggressive. It will clearly establish Maryland as a leader. And so there's a whole lot going on. We're also looking at a lot of electrification activities. The buildings piece is a piece of that. Using clean electricity. And again, electrification of vehicles there's so much going on, it's hard to capture it all in these general bullets, but there is so much going on with the electrification and the zero emission vehicle concept. It's now not just light duty vehicles, it's medium and heavy duty vehicles. There's a huge amount of work going on with the infrastructure needed to get us to very deep electrification goals. And again, there's just a huge amount of things going on in the climate change arena. And again, one of the things we've offered to the commission in the past is if you ever wanted a voluntary webinar, either early in the morning, late at night, middle of the day, we're happy to do that. We've gotten very good at these webinars, and I know not everybody would want it, but that's something, John, we can talk about. This issue of climate change is a full briefing in and of itself, and the work we're doing on environmental justice is also a full briefing in and of itself. But so think about that. If people ever want that, we're open to do that as a voluntary educational sort of sharing information kind of thing. Next slide, please. So a couple others, the other pieces that we're working pretty hard on. Replacing the fossil fuel heating systems in buildings, moving towards electric heat pumps. Again, all part of legislation that's being discussed this year. A huge area that we're going to be bringing another rule to you in the not too distant future is reducing leaking methane sources. We've already done the natural gas industry. We're now looking at the landfill effort, and after that, we're going to be looking at the distribution sector, the way natural gas is delivered to people and businesses. We also have a whole lot going on right now with sequestration. A really interesting part of climate change is that it's not just adopting regulations and other things to reduce emissions. It's looking at sinks and looking at the way to capture carbon, and sequestration is absolutely key to meeting our long-term goals. So next slide, please. Again, we're still doing a lot of work. Even though we have our plan in, we're still doing a lot of work to improve it. We have a mid-course correction coming up in another year. And so even though someone might argue that the plan is done for now, it's really not done. We're doing a lot of interesting technical analysis. People like Ben and Bob Wright are on have seen a lot of this work. It's pretty interesting and cutting edge stuff. We have a buildings plan, which is very interesting and quite controversial. So it came out of our Maryland Climate Commission. It's now being pushed through the legislature. We'll see where that ends up. And again, I mentioned the mid-course correction. That's almost like another plan. So, and again, we're getting smarter on climate change every time we do an updated plan. It's not only an interesting step of progress, but there's so much to be learned with the way we do the climate change work. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned the legislation, very active this year, both in the House and the Senate. We'll see where that ends up. Really deep goals, some really specific things on buildings. We'll see where it ends up. The Climate Commission is a very active process. Anybody that wants to learn more about that can go onto our webpage. Every meeting and every agenda and the follow-ups are all on there. We have 4 different working groups, one on mitigation, one on adaptation, one on science, and one on education and outreach. One of our priorities is short-lived climate pollutants. These are greenhouse gases that have a very quick process. They're really important to get at in the early part of the process. Again, AQCAC helped us move forward with some of the country's earliest and best hydrofluorocarbon regulations. Now the federal government is coming in and is going to make it what we initiated here in Maryland and California and some other areas, make it a national program. And we've also moved forward with the natural gas compressor station rule that you all helped us move forward. Again, one of the first states to do that. Now it's becoming a national effort, which is great. And again, we're working on landfills. Other things that we'll be bringing to AQCAC in this arena will, I think, be really interesting over the next few years. Quite a bit of pressure from the research community and the environmental advocacy community to deal with things like methane and HFCs and black carbon. So this will be a hot area for AQCAC in the next couple years. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm going to probably skip this one. We're running out of time a little bit, but the bottom line is that methane is a real high priority. We'll be inviting you all to our meetings, our stakeholder meetings. We'll be going through all the data we have on why natural gas emissions. But one of the most important things that's happening on methane is the research is out there telling us that we might not have all the right data we need to do the really good job we need to do with methane. You know, aircraft flights that show leaking methane in areas that made us take second looks, new improved ways to do inventories. It's a really hot area, and it's probably one of our hottest regulatory areas right now, probably the mobile source transportation areas, the other really hot areas. So next slide, please. Again, I'll skip this one, but a lot of other folks, we're learning a lot from other folks like California and Oregon. We have a group called the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is now almost 30 states working together on some of these initiatives. We now have an active federal government. So the U.S. Climate Alliance was literally put together at a time when we didn't have a real strong federal response. We're really hoping that with a strong federal approach that we make even more progress. U.S. Climate Alliance has been a powerful partnership, but now we have an EPA, we think, who's stepping in and gonna move the ball in the right direction. Next slide, please. Again, I'm gonna slip past this one because we're running out of time, Randy. So let's invite, Megan, is this where we transition? I hand it back to you again, or you want me to continue on this? I think this is where we transition back. I'll give it to you, Megan, real quick.
Sure, I can go through the next few rapid priorities. So these are mobile related rapid priorities, and I talked a little bit about the medium and heavy duty ZEV MOU already, and that was signed by Governor Hogan and about 16 other states. The Transportation and Climate Initiative continues to be a high priority. They're looking at analysis and expansions of the regional program are still ongoing. Electric vehicles, as Tad has alluded to, are another very high priority. The California and Clean Air Act Section 177. So Maryland is a Section 177 state, which means that we have adopted the California standards, and that was challenged. There's currently lawsuits going through the courts, and EPA has recently reinstated the California waiver that allows other states to follow California emission standards as well. So that will all be pending as it moves through the courts. There's additional potential for regs to adopt the California Advanced Clean Truck Program, which would build on the Clean Cars program that Maryland already follows by including medium and heavy duty trucks as well for ZEVs. And EPA is moving to harmonize the federal program with the California program. As I said, they just recently announced a medium and heavy duty ZEV truck rule. So for environmental justice, Tad is going to go into a lot more detail on this, but we are working on a lot of hyperlocal air monitoring projects. There are 4 efforts that are now either up and running or will soon be running in Baltimore, Cheverly, St. Mary's County, and the DC area. There's a new and reinvigorated process at MDE for environmental justice and how it's being implemented. And the AIR program has been working on a lot of community partnerships and is now being blended with the MDE-wide effort as well. Just quickly on some of our other partnerships with the PORT program and the Peak Day partnership. We have a very strong PORT program where we work with MDOT, MEA, and the PORT in over 15 different communities. There's been $15 million in investment into clean air and very large reductions in NOx, greenhouse gases, PM, air toxics, and diesel's particulate. And this is largely due to a lot of newer and cleaner vehicles being implemented around the port. We also have our Peak Day partnership, which is in its 5th year, and asks our voluntary sources, our stationary sources, to do a lot of reductions on the worst ozone days. Next slide, please. So as in terms of ozone, there are a lot of transport actions underway. There's the 184C petition, which the Ozone Transport Commission submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency, and they're still reviewing that. There is the Cross-State Air Pollution Rule update for the 2015 standard, and that's what I alluded to earlier, which is signed by EPA and released on Friday. And MTE has also been looking at strengthening RACT in Pennsylvania permits. And good neighbor SIPs are also still in the works right now. We're looking at municipal waste combustors and permit conditions and tougher regulations for those. And we're also still looking at aftermarket catalysts, although federal action on that is also a possibility. In terms of sulfur dioxide, all 3 areas in Maryland are now meeting the standard, and we are working on the attainment process and demo process to demonstrate to EPA that all of those areas are now meeting the standard. And lastly, for my section, the diesel emissions reduction efforts. So we have a lot of community projects that were funded with VW funds, including a new trash truck in Turner Station and a diesel yard truck in Curtis Bay. We have VW projects in and around the North Point area, port projects where we repower tugs and purchase trucks and handling equipment. And as I alluded to earlier, these are much cleaner vehicles. For instance, NOx has been reduced by 406 tons and 2.97 million in investment. In terms of private sector projects, we have repowering of tugs and purchases of diesel buses, locomotive switchers, and electric cranes. NOx is reduced by 1,876 tons and 22.3 million in investment. There's also other VW projects with a total of 133.7 million in investments. Now I'll turn it back over to Tad to go into more detail on the environmental justice and community engagement partnerships that we've been undertaking.
And I'm going to go very fast because we're about at the end of the, but this is up amongst our highest priorities. It's an extremely intense effort. We have the reinvigorated MDE-wide process. We also have the things we're doing in the AIR program. We've got partnerships going with over 9 communities. Many of those some of those have resulted in cleanup projects. Megan went through the Turner Station in Curtis Bay. We have this partnership with the port where we've cleaned up a lot of diesel emissions around the port. There's about 15 communities working with us on that effort. And again, we have these hyper-local air monitoring sensor networks. That's where like, I'll give you an example where there's about 30 sensor monitoring stations now set up in an area like Cheverly, Maryland, where we have real-time data that the residents can get access to, and we've been using it for multiple purposes as well at MDE. Next slide, please. Port partnership. It's been a wonderful situation. Partnership between government agencies, MDOT, MDE, MEA, the port, and about 15 communities. And it's a big deal because diesel in these neighborhoods is probably amongst the highest exposure areas that you see in certain communities. And again, significant investment, probably through 2030, it's going to be $30 to $40 million in investments. So a lot of diesel cleanup as part of the port partnership. It's been a real success story. Next slide, please. New partnership opportunities. Again, right now there's an unprecedented amount of money available to work on these partnerships. So we're trying to take advantages of everything we can. We are really set up for these community-based partnership projects, but that's not it. There's also specific funding for ports. There's specific funding targeting private sector projects. So we're going to be looking to take advantage of all of those. Obviously, diesel cleanup, a real focus these days on electrification that have a community-based angle. We're doing some of that right now around the port. The issue of working with communities so they become part of the system, the citizen science piece, helping run the monitors and working with them sort of in partnership. These hyper-local networks are going up pretty much over the next 5 years. Many areas of the state will have these hyper-local networks. There's so many other opportunities. It's another right behind climate change. Environmental justice is way up there at the top of our priority list. Next slide, please. Chevrolet, this is a really interesting effort. Again, this is the one where Dr. Kobe Wilson out of the University of Maryland's Siege Center is working with us. It's about 30 sensors set up throughout Chevrolet. It's just outside of the DC area in PG County. And again, a lot of the credit for this one goes to Dr. Wilson, who got this going and has it set up. We're now working with them in partnership. Next slide, please. We ran a very interesting thing where we used the sensor data to target inspections. We ran a really intense effort in June and July of 21, and we actually used the sensor data and wind data and emissions data to target inspections, not only looking at things like stationary sources with smokestacks, but also looking at non-traditional sources like bus terminals and warehouse areas where you see a lot of diesel trucks idling. We're very interesting. We have a report out on it. It's listed at the bottom. Anybody that wants to read that report, it's worth a read, to be honest with you. It's easy to read. It's got some amazing technical work in it as well. We actually have a workshop coming up this spring with the Chevrolet area on how to do more intense enforcement action on fugitive dust, diesel idling, and stationary source targeting. So anybody's interested in sitting in that public meeting, it's going to be in the April timeframe. Next slide, please. Just one other example, Johns Hopkins, and we have Dr. Hobbs on the phone today. He's part of this, but this is probably one of the country's most sophisticated hyperlocal networks being put up by Johns Hopkins and Yale. MDE is a partner. Again, driven with some federal money, but a partnership with many communities. And this is a whole lot of interesting analysis and data, different pollutants than covered in Chevrolet. Chevrolet's fairly simple, mostly fine particles. This includes a lot of other pollutants. And again, we really appreciate the partnership with Johns Hopkins on this one. We also have similar projects going on right now in St. Mary's County, Harford County, PG County. So this is happening fast and furious. Next slide, Randy. We have this new effort in Curtis Bay. I think many of you have seen the news reports on the explosion that took place in the Curtis Bay area, now more recently a fire. So there's a lot of community interest. We are already working with the community to get a hyperlocal network set up, some other enhanced monitoring being considered. We are looking at new permit requirements at the CSX facility where the explosion took place. And again, over time, I believe we will be doing another targeted inspection, maybe a multimedia targeted inspection program in the Curtis Bay area. That's probably within the next 3 to 6 months that's coming. The air piece may start a little earlier. So next slide, please. That's it. I'm sorry we rushed through it. As you know, I'm proud of the work we do. I like the work we do. I talk too much sometimes, but we wanted to give you a snapshot of sort of all the stuff that's going on. And this really was just a snapshot. So I'd be happy to take questions. I know we're at the end of the agenda and we've gone a little over time. So thank you for your attention. I hope we didn't drag things on too long. Any questions, we'd be happy to take them. I know we're in overtime and we can always you can always drop a note to us and we're happy to respond.
You do a great job by scheduling these briefings at the end so people that have can't meet it can go. So thank you for doing that. Anybody have questions for the MDE team?
I think the
Great meeting. We'll look forward to your minor revisions to the tampering rule, and we'll respond to you by email on that.
Thanks for the great work, the department does. I think you give too much credit to the council. Okay.
Well, thank you all. We appreciate your role. Keep us on our toes.
Bye, everybody.
See you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Oh.